All right. Good afternoon or good morning to some people that are in the Central Mountain and Pacific time zones. This is the first time I'm doing this, starting a new YouTube show. So this is the first episode of Pick and Pop, where I'll look to talk about essentially what I know the most about going on in sports, try and give some opinions, analysis, and I'll do some special videos as time moves on, as we approach the postseasons in the sports that I'm looking at, just kind of seeing how I'll analyze that and then make specific videos potentially about series previews, or in the case of the MLB, division previews about what's coming up, as we're, of course, just 10 days away from opening day. So that is, of course, something to look at. But right now, we're still in the middle of the NBA season, kind of the dog days of the season where teams are grinding out injuries, looking to get into the playoffs. We have four teams that have clinched already: the Raptors and the Celtics in the East, the Warriors and the Rockets in the Western Conference. So that has been a big part of the story so far, especially since the All-Star break, or the amount of injuries that have been sustained across the NBA. And that's certainly been a problem for a lot of teams in both conferences. And right now, of course, the Golden State Warriors are dealing with that the most. And that is going to be the first thing I talk about today. So just in general, how injuries have impacted the teams in the playoff race. And as I said, we have four teams that have already clinched. But if you look down the line at who are the top eight teams in both conferences right now, and looking at what injuries they've had to deal with, you can't go through all the teams without at least finding one major piece that hasn't been able to contribute the way that they expected to coming into the season. And one of the few teams that's been able to really avoid this has been the Toronto Raptors. They're 52-18. They're essentially locked into that top spot in the Eastern Conference, something that they have never done before in their franchise history, earn the top spot in a conference in a regular season. And this year, they've really been fantastic. I can't talk about them enough. And as a Boston Celtics fan, it's almost irritating to think of it that way. But I mean, if you go down the roster of this team, and it's just so much more than the ISO ball of Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan this season. That was really what the identity of the team was up until this year, was that they had two elite players in their backcourt that could take you one-on-one, that could get to the line. But now that DeMar DeRozan has developed a three-point shot, now that they have a bench that, while maybe unproven and inexperienced as far as the playoffs go, has been one of the most productive benches in the NBA, bar none, between what we've seen out of Pascal Siakam, what we've seen out of DeLon Wright, what we've been able to see out of Fred VanVleet, who is really a great story, undrafted, coming out of Rockford, Illinois, and that ends up playing such a significant part on that team's bench. And not to mention CJ Miles, who was one of the better three-point shooters in the NBA. And then you take a look at their starting lineup. Where do they go beyond their backcourt? Well, you still have Jonas Valanciunas, who has been healthy the whole year and has had arguably his best season. He's starting to shoot threes and has been shooting threes this year. And then beyond that, you look at Serge Ibaka, another very good big man, not the same kind of player that he was back in Oklahoma City, but he's a different kind of player, somebody that has really fallen in love with that mid-range to long-range jump shot. He takes more of those than he probably should, and he's not quite the shot blocker that he once was when he played for the Thunder, but he is still somebody that is coming up with big plays for the Toronto Raptors down the stretch. And all of those guys have stayed healthy the whole year, which has been a big part of what has allowed the Raptors to reach this degree of success, especially when you look at the other teams in the Eastern Conference, specifically those that would potentially challenge the Raptors for that top spot in a perfect world, have dealt with so many injuries. And obviously that starts with the Boston Celtics in the amount of injuries that they have had to endure this entire season, but especially recently. I mean, you lose Gordon Hayward on opening night, and that's something that became part of the narrative of the season, just something that had to be dealt with, that a top free agent that was signed in the offseason could not play a contributing role heading into this season. And that's, of course, really demoralizing for Gordon Hayward himself, but for the Boston Celtics as well, to deal with that on the first night of the season. But if you look at the injuries that they have had to deal with since then and how that has impacted that team moving forward, that is what has really been severe, because it hasn't just been Gordon Hayward. Kyrie Irving, who will probably deal with knee problems for the rest of his career. Danny Ainge just talked about giving Kyrie Irving surgery potentially this offseason, if not the next, meaning that it's not really urgent, but that his knee soreness is something that is recurring. It's routinely sore after games, and sometimes it is sore for an extended period of time, like it is right now. So the Celtics are being very cautious with Kyrie Irving as far as when he's going to play, making sure he's 100%. But it's other injuries that have really played the big role in dictating how the Celtics have to handle their season moving forward. That's just going to unfortunately have to be a big part of it for them. And Marcus Smart's injury has been the big thing. And it started off from his incident of punching a picture frame, messing up his hand there, missing 2 weeks and 11 games, in which the Celtics really struggled. He comes back after the All-Star break, and all of a sudden you have a team that is re-energized or offensively getting back in a rhythm. And that's where you were kind of reminded of what Marcus Smart does for that team on the offensive end, being an outstanding passer, somebody who isn't a great shooter, but is capable of hitting big shots. So those are all things that you want to see from somebody in your backcourt coming off the bench, and that's on top of the fact that he is the Celtics' best defender. So all of those things combined, and then him having another injury where he tears a tendon in his thumb, he's going to be out 6 to 8 weeks, so that probably puts you at the second round of the playoffs. And while I do think that the Celtics are going to win a playoff series regardless, when you move into the second round, you're still shorthanded. You know you're going to get Jaylen Brown back soon, but you're still going to be without Gordon Hayward. In all likelihood, you're still going to be without Daniel Tice, who a lot of people have forgotten about as one of the better rookies in the league this year. I mean, this is somebody 25 years old, coming over from Germany, outstanding find from Danny Ainge, and he fits right in to the Boston Celtics system, ended up being really, really effective and contributing off the bench, learned how to shoot threes as the season went on, but he tore his meniscus and he won't be able to play for the rest of the year. But having that 7-foot presence off the bench who can grab offensive rebounds, can be a good post-up defender, can occasionally hit an outside shot or two, that really makes a difference. And while the Celtics can alleviate some of that with Greg Monroe in the mix right now, that is still a situation that, they're losing something in, because Greg Monroe isn't really going to hit those outside shots very often. He's probably not even going to take them. So when he's out on the floor, that removes that option for the Celtics, and it makes them a little easier to defend than they would be if it were Daniel Tice on the floor. So that there are a lot of difficulties there. And when you see that matchup in a playoff series against a healthy Toronto Raptors team or against a Cleveland Cavaliers team, who, while I still have my doubts about, I don't know if they're going to be the team that makes it out of the East. But what I do know is that with Kevin Love back in the lineup, they have a lot better chance of getting it done. And they have a lot of inexperience on that team. But if you move forward into the postseason, you're going to have games where Rodney Hood and Jordan Clarkson and Larry Nance just don't figure it out. They're not going to have good games. It's going to happen. So that's when you're going to need to rely on the veteran presence that is still on the team. The guys like J.R. Smith, the guys like George Hill, the guys like Kyle Korver, Jose Calderon even. Those are the pieces that are going to need to step up in the postseason and help take some of that pressure off of LeBron James, who I don't think anybody is doubting is still going to be in top form and still going to be the best player in the world by the time the playoffs run around, which is why no matter what kind of shape the Cavaliers are in, you really can't definitively say that they're not going to make it. But even with the revamp that they had after the All-Star break, and they are 7-7 since the break, I think it is pretty clear that this is a team that still has defensive difficulties. They got a lot younger. They're still really good at shooting. They're good at moving the ball, but you're going to have a lot of difficulties, especially as the postseason comes around, this game slows down. The Cavaliers are going to be put into a spot to where they're going to have to figure out how to get these guys to attack the basket, how to get these guys to draw contact, how to create offense in different ways, because when the game slows down and you're not able to set up good possessions in transition, you're going to see a lot more half-court ball, and it's going to be a lot more isolation with LeBron James and just trying to create opportunities for the spot-up shooters that he has on the floor. So the Cavaliers have certainly had their problems. I do think that they are a better team since the All-Star break, but with all that being said, it really helps that they've had Kevin Love come back, because if not, they could very well be in the 2 seed right now in the Eastern Conference, and that would really make things a lot different. And then if you look at the other injuries that have happened in the East, like, of course, Washington has been without John Wall for most of this year. So in that sense, the Toronto Raptors have kind of gotten a break, and with other teams in the East not really having to deal with significant injuries that would affect their chances at getting that top seed and having the best opportunity possible to move deeper in the playoffs than they have before. But looking in the Western Conference, every team in the West, every competing team in the West has dealt with significant injuries. I mean, if you look at the Houston Rockets, even while that's not something that they're dealing with now, they were without Chris Paul for a significant amount of time, and they were without James Harden for a significant amount of time. And I think they proved that they are for real. And I'm not really sold that the Houston Rockets can beat the Golden State Warriors in a playoff series. In fact, I'm not even sold that that's going to be the conference final. In fact, I don't count out the Oklahoma City Thunder to make a run. I don't even count out the Portland Trail Blazers. I think the Western Conference playoffs are going to be extremely interesting. A lot of that depends on what the situation with Kawhi Leonard is going to be, which has been one of the most confusing spectacles of recent memory, really, in professional sports, because I think looking back at the kind of identity that Kawhi Leonard developed in the NBA as being somebody that was really quiet, just kind of went with what was going on, was always able to, find his role on that team. Of course, came in as a younger player with a team that had, that veteran core, and still to some extent does have that same veteran core. He wins a finals MVP at a very young age, emerges as one of the best defenders in the game, and then starts to become an outstanding two-way player. And everybody knows his excellence, his greatness, what he's capable of every time he goes out on the floor. And everybody knows that that kind of presence in a playoff series can really be a game changer, whether that's against the Warriors, the Rockets, or whoever. Having Kawhi Leonard on the floor, somebody that can drop 25 to 30 a night while locking down the other team's best player, that's really going to make a difference, especially in the context of the Golden State Warriors. I mean, they don't really know how these injuries are going to affect their team going down the stretch, because right now, their big four, all of them are hurt in some capacity. Steph Curry's supposed to come back Friday. That's the Warriors' next game. But he has sprained that ankle twice this year. So that's something that you still have to keep an eye on, especially remembering 2016 and the ankle injury that he sustained in the playoffs. And, a lot of people, including myself, think that at least had something to do with Steph Curry not completely being Steph Curry that postseason. And then you look at Kevin Durant's ribcage injury, which he should be back in time for the playoffs, but it's still something to worry about. Same thing with Klay Thompson and his hand injury. And then Draymond Green, who left the game last night after getting kicked in the groin, ironically enough. But that doesn't look to be a severe injury. But either way, the Warriors have dealt with issues this season that they haven't dealt with in the past couple of years as far as injuries and having multiple guys hurt at once. Kind of the luxury that the Warriors have had in the past is that when they've been dealing with injuries, it's only been one of them, and it's almost not noticeable at all when any one of those four is gone, because the other three are very easily able to adapt and make up for it. But now all of a sudden you have, that second unit playing the majority of the minutes for the Warriors. And while that's still not a bad basketball team by any stretch of imagination, if they end up facing a Spurs team that all of a sudden is healthy with Kawhi Leonard and the Warriors aren't quite 100%, they're at the very least going to be challenged. And I think if you look at other teams in the Western Conference and where the difficulties may be, I think if you're the Oklahoma City Thunder, this is particularly hard to swallow, especially as they're getting hot right now, because without Andre Robertson, arguably one of the best on-ball defenders in basketball, your chances at shutting down a team like Houston or Golden State goes down significantly. Because if you look at those games that they played earlier in the year where Oklahoma City, who has beaten both of those teams multiple times, I believe, they've beaten the Warriors twice. I think they've beaten the Rockets twice, maybe just once. But anyway, they have shown that they can beat the elite teams in the NBA, but that was with Andre Robertson on the floor, making that difference, locking down the top players on the other side. And when you're playing somebody 7 times in 2 weeks, it just gets a bit tougher to consistently do that. And especially without Andre Robertson on the floor, I think the Thunder are still an incredible challenge for whoever they face, but I think it would be really tough for them to make that run to the finals without Andre Robertson. I think offensively, when they're on, they can really match up with Golden State and Houston. I think especially Houston, because Russell Westbrook is the most difficult matchup that Chris Paul can have for a point guard. So if you're able to at least kind of neutralize Chris Paul's impact and his ability to get really good passes off and his ability to get open shots off, that can start to make things difficult for the Rockets, because you know you're not going to guard James Harden, arguably one of the most unguardable players ever. So I do think that the Thunder can really put up a challenge against the Houston Rockets and against the Golden State Warriors, but I don't really know if without Andre Robertson, they can really make that happen. And then, of course, the New Orleans Pelicans. Anthony Davis said not too long ago that if they still have Boogie Cousins, they can make a run to the finals. And people are like, really? Well, I'm saying, why not? I mean, if you look at the way Anthony Davis has played recently, and even how he was playing when Boogie Cousins was in the lineup, you bring him back and you look at the moves that this team has made to get better since losing DeMarcus Cousins. You know, they add Nikola Mirotic off the bench. I mean, they have 3 bench pieces that can reliably score in double figures on any given night. Between Mirotic, between Ian Clark and Darius Miller, those are rotation players that can really give you production. And then beyond Anthony Davis, you have Emeka Okafor, somebody that, I mean, what a great story for somebody like him, a former blue chip prospect and second overall pick and rookie of the year, to make it all the way back to the NBA after having not been there since 2013 and to play a really big impact. He's not really a good offensive player anymore, but it's just somebody that can give you another 7 to 8 rebounds, another 2 to 3 blocks. And when you're talking about having the most dominant big man in the game and trying to find other ways to keep up with another team defensively to give him opportunities, having a guy like Emeka Okafor is really helpful. And then I think the biggest X factor in all of this with the New Orleans Pelicans is Rajon Rondo. If he's healthy, I can't think of too many other guys that you'd rather have starting as a point guard in the playoffs. He moves the ball still better than pretty much anybody else. He's starting to shoot a little more reliably than he has in the past, but I think the biggest thing is that he's giving you things that don't show up on a stat sheet if you have him in a playoff game. He's giving you experience. He's giving you a lot of finesse. He's giving you an ability to really be able to surprise a team in an opening round series. And that really wouldn't surprise me, especially because it's still extremely likely that New Orleans ends up with home court advantage in the first round. And right now, outside of Houston and Golden State, you have the Trailblazers in the 3 seed in the West, and that's something that they're kind of building up a lead on, and then Oklahoma City in the 4. But New Orleans very recently was the 3 spot. They've kind of struggled recently, but if they're able to squeak out home court advantage in that first round, that could really make things difficult for who they're playing, even though they're not that great of a home team. And I think either way, I mean, if the season ended right now, they're currently the 7, they would match up with Golden State. And whether Golden State is fully tooled up or not, I don't think that's really a team that they want to play. The Warriors and the Pelicans played each other in the first round back in 2015, but there you're looking at a 22-year-old Anthony Davis who was playing in the playoffs for his first time and didn't quite have the artillery that he has now. And a 7 seed and 8 seed in the West this year is not what it was even last year or a couple of years ago. I mean, this is one of the stronger conferences that we've seen in a while, having 10 teams that really could give a real fight in a playoff series. And I really do think that if Anthony Davis continues to play the way he has, if he stays healthy, God forbid if he just stays healthy for the last couple of weeks of the regular season, it can really, really make things tough for whoever plays New Orleans. And then if they get in the second round, who knows? And then just makes you think, what if they had DeMarcus Cousins back in that lineup? But I do think that with how successful New Orleans has been both before and in the wake of the injury, that is just more influence in helping the case of DeMarcus Cousins returning to New Orleans to play with Anthony Davis. I certainly thought that they had outstanding chemistry with one another, and DeMarcus Cousins was really doing a great job of running that offense. He became one of the better passing big men in the league within the past couple of years, really starting to shoot a lot of threes, not exactly accurately or efficiently yet at around 33, 34%, but he's shooting a lot of them. And those are weapons that if you're the New Orleans Pelicans, who's kind of running the show with two big men, you need them to shoot threes at times. And Anthony Davis isn't quite at that spot that DeMarcus Cousins was at as far as shooting from long range. So those are the big characteristics where if DeMarcus Cousins was in the lineup, you could really see that Anthony Davis was not making a baseless claim about that team potentially being a team that can make it into the NBA Finals, because especially if you're looking at other teams that could deal with similar problems, if the Rockets or Warriors were missing one of their big pieces and ended up playing a fully tooled New Orleans Pelicans team that had Rajon Rondo, you really don't exactly know what could be possible in that situation. But I think really the moral of the story here is that injuries have really changed the course of how this season was supposed to turn out, whether it's Kawhi Leonard, whether it's what the Thunder have been dealing with Andre Robertson, the Pelicans and DeMarcus Cousins. I didn't even mention the Minnesota Timberwolves, who seem to have had a very, very firm holding on that 4th spot in the Western Conference. They're now the 8th. They don't even know if they're going to make the playoffs for sure or not. And they've been dealing with the injury of Jimmy Butler, who they brought in to be that third piece with Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins. And that really has worked out well. I mean, something that on paper looked like a great idea is a great idea and has been a great idea. And Jimmy Butler has fit in so well in that system. And, they're hoping that he can return. And then all of a sudden, the Timberwolves become a team that you don't really want to play in a playoff series when and if Jimmy Butler comes back and if he's in shape to really play a large role. So if Jimmy Butler comes back at the end of the year and the Timberwolves somehow stay in the 8th seed, then they're playing the Rockets. And if the Rockets are playing a fully tooled Minnesota Timberwolves team, not saying that they would lose, but they might lose a couple of games, and it would be interesting. And I think that's the most exciting part about this year's NBA season is that East or Western Conference, it doesn't look like there's going to be many first-round sweeps. I mean, we're very used to seeing at least a couple of series every year that really don't have that much of a fight involved to them, to where one team is just so significantly more talented than another. But even if you look at the 1-8s and 2-7s in both conferences, I'm not convinced that a Raptors-Bucks series, again, which happened in the first round last year, wouldn't be very exciting. I'm not convinced that a Rockets-Timberwolves or Warriors-Pelicans series or a Celtics-Bucks series, those are supposed to be the lopsided matchups. And I think with all 4 of them, you could see things getting really interesting between Celtics Heat. I meant to say Miami's the 7th seed in the East right now. And those are all series to where you could see the lower seeded team winning some games. And that's what's really making the prospects of this postseason really exciting, is the fact that the seedings aren't determined yet. You don't know what's going to go on. And that if you look at the middle of the playoff pack in both of those conferences, they're really similar teams that really match up well together. So I'm really, really excited for the 3, 6, and 4, 5 matchups in both conferences right now. That would pit the Cavs and the Sixers against each other. I think that would be very, very exciting. And the Pacers and the Wizards, who match up very well against each other, especially if you have John Wall back in the mix. And then in the West, you'd be looking at the Trailblazers playing the Jazz, 2 division rivals, and then the Thunder and the Spurs, who always match up well against each other. So you really be looking at very, very exciting first-round matchups, and that's certainly something to look forward to heading into the next month. Playoffs will begin on April 14th, and it's March 20th, so it's less than a month away. Teams are starting to get an idea of what kind of rosters are going to be fielding, who they're waiting for to get better, things like that. And then, of course, on the opposite end of the standings, you have a very, very messy very, very messy race, I should say, in the reverse standings, seeing who can tank the hardest. Right now, The Phoenix Suns are 19-52. They're currently at the bottom of the league. But then you have the Memphis Grizzlies, who are 19-51. The Atlanta Hawks, who are 20-50. Orlando Magic, who are 21-49. The Dallas Mavericks, who are 22-48. Brooklyn's 23-48. Sacramento's 23-49. So there you, and the Chicago Bulls are 24-46. So there you have 8 teams, the bottom 4 ones in each conference, that are just in a huge cluster. And all of them, we're kind of going into this year with the intention of really having a good shot at the first overall pick. That is, if you're not the Brooklyn Nets, because that pick they do not own anymore, of course. But I mean, especially for a team like the Atlanta Hawks, who going into this year had made the postseason every year since 2008, finally looking to make that definitive rebuild. And, they might end up with a pick that doesn't really facilitate that at all. And some of those teams in the bottom at least have a few pieces in place that are going to be big parts of their future. I mean, you look at the Phoenix Suns, Devin Booker could be the best scorer in the NBA someday. If you look at the Atlanta Hawks, who don't have a clear one, John Collins is a good piece to have. The Orlando Magic have Jonathan Isaac and Aaron Gordon as good pieces to move forward. The Dallas Mavericks have Dennis Smith Jr., Sacramento Kings with De'Aaron Fox. But, you have a team like the Memphis Grizzlies or, the Brooklyn Nets that don't really have that definitive piece that they want to move forward yet. And with the Memphis Grizzlies, who opted not to trade Marc Gasol, or still hanging on to him. Mike Conley's missed essentially the whole year. And with both of those guys on really lucrative contracts, I think they're waiting to see what pick they get to make their decision on how they're going to address their future. Because, I mean, we're talking about Atlanta and them making the playoffs for so long. Memphis is another team that for the majority of this decade has been one of the better teams in the NBA. They made the playoffs heading into this year every year since 2011, including an appearance in the conference finals in 2013. And now, they've reached that stage where they're being forced to rebuild, and they don't know exactly what to do with their veteran pieces that are still extremely talented and can play a huge role on a competing team. So I think if Memphis ends up getting a top 3 overall pick, they may be looking to part with Mike Conley and Marc Gasol to try and find maybe another pick or another really good young piece and try and speed up the rebuild. But if they get a lower pick, they might just try and hang on to them and incorporate that pick into a system that has Mike Conley and Marc Gasol still with it. It's just kind of weird because the Grizzlies seemed like they were going that direction. They got rid of Zach Randolph. They got rid of Vince Carter heading into this year. But, they held on to those 2 guys. And even as the trade rumors were swirling, they never really seriously considered making a move, even though Marc Gasol would be somebody that would net a bigger return than essentially anybody in the NBA as far as a trade piece. And that just never happened. So the Grizzlies, I think, are really going to wait to stand by, especially see who they want their coach to be, if that's going to continue to be JB Bickerstaff or if they're going to try and find somebody else to revamp that team. But that'll be really interesting. I think looking at the standings, each team has placed a lot of importance into the results of this year, whether that would be, looking for a really good draft pick or looking for the best chance to make some noise in the playoffs, but certainly really interesting throughout. And I think especially for those bottom teams, this is going to be an opportunity to succeed in the future, which is, of course, if you look at teams that haven't had a good degree of success in a while, Brooklyn Nets, Orlando Magic, Sacramento Kings, the Phoenix Suns, teams that, haven't been to the playoffs in a while. They're really looking for this year to be that final year that they're in this stage because, you have impatient fan bases and you have impatient players as well. And it makes you wonder if the Suns are going to be this bad for that much longer. How much longer is Devin Booker going to stay put? How much longer is Aaron Gordon going to stay put at where he is? So those are all questions that these organizations need to be asking themselves heading into the summer. That's pretty much all I have for basketball right now. I'll talk a little bit about baseball since we are just 9 days until opening day now. And of course, things are getting really exciting. March 29th, which is one of the earliest opening days that we've had in a while. I feel like, the schedule kind of revamps every couple of years. I think back in 2014 was the last time that the season begun that early. I think March 31st was opening day back in 2014. But now, you have an earlier starting season, which is always nice. And I will be doing division preview videos throughout the next week to kind of look at each individual division. But I think a lot of baseball fans certainly have their eyes on the same couple of teams as far as who's going to be the biggest competitors heading into this next season. Of course, the New York Yankees, with the addition of Giancarlo Stanton, are really going to be scary. Washington Nationals are still likely going to be the team to beat in the National League East. It'll be really interesting to see how the LA Dodgers respond to their season last year. Of course, 104 wins, dominated the vast majority of the season, and lost in a gut-wrenching World Series in 7 games. And just had news today that Justin Turner broke his wrist. So not only is that a bad injury for the amount of time that he'll miss for the time being, a wrist injury for a power hitter is very, very concerning, and especially at his age already of 33. Even when he comes back, you have to consider the fact that he'll probably lose some of that power, at least for a little. So that'll play an impact in the Dodgers season for sure. And that's what makes spring training perhaps more difficult and sometimes discouraging than the preseasons in any other sport, is that injuries really do happen, and you could have your season take a completely different direction by something that happens in spring training. So that's always tough, something you got to look for, and something that does happen to some teams every year. But I do think that in general, the team to beat in baseball is probably the Houston Astros on paper, especially with the addition that they made to their rotation in Garrett Cole. But of course, it's so tough to look at these things when you have a 162-game season. You're trying to look at them all before the season starts. A lot of times these attitudes and perceptions on what a team's going to be doing will change just within the first month of the year. You always have your players that are going to be hot throughout April, really produce well, put their team on the map. But then it really becomes in the May and June phase, or are you going to be climbing out of it at that point or not? So I think it'll be really, really interesting. I think the AL West is going to be a very, very exciting division, probably top to bottom, the best in baseball. The LA Angels, I'd expect to be a lot better this year. The Seattle Mariners, who have been a popular pick to make it back to the playoffs the past couple of years. I mean, every year since 2014, they've been trying to make that final push, and they've ended up on the short end of it, sometimes closer than in others. 2014, 2016, they were in it until the end of the year. Last year in 2015, struggled a bit more. That Texas Rangers are probably going to be starting the rebuilding process relatively soon. And then if you look at the AL Central, are the Cleveland Indians still going to be the team that they were last year? Minnesota, I'd expect to also get better. Really like the addition that they made with Lance Lynn in their rotation. So those are all things I'm going to look at individual videos as I do previews on the divisions. But that's all I have for you today. It's been the first episode of Pick and Pop. Make sure to subscribe and hope everybody enjoyed, and have a good day.